And I'm asking this as a more as a mom's question more than my capacity at HDI. But I'm seeing an increasing trend among younger parents where their children are being pushed into a segregated environment in education. Parents who really want their kids to be included as much as possible and who understand the law, but the problem is that the school districts keep arguing against them, saying that the least restrictive environment isn't access to typically developing peers, but instead um, having fewer supports. And they say that, when they don't have to provide an aid in the classroom and they're not having to separately modify assignments, that these students are actually being more independent in a self-contained classroom. And so it's been very difficult. And I'm speaking from living in Georgia, so you don't have to blame Kentucky on this one. But I'm seeing it where it's happening district-wide in some areas. And so I guess what I'm asking is, since there's not really looking like there'll be, the reauthorization idea might not be helpful toward that end, are there class action lawsuits or anything that parents that are currently in the works to help advocate for parents who are in that situation?
Not that I know of on the state level, as far as a class or anything. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a good example of an issue where when we have people like Melody Musgrove, who's not there anymore at the Office of Special Education Programs, or the person who is still there at the Office of Civil Rights at the Department of Education, this could be a letter to the department asking for clarification and a letter back from the department providing the clarification that can be used to do this kind of advocacy. So I think there are a lot of ways you could bring a lawsuit, but this may be as simple as getting a clarification from the Department of Education. What do we mean by least restrictive environment with this fact pattern?
And I would say call our office, call the Protection and Advocacy Office, if you have not already, or encourage them to. It wouldn't surprise me. I think a lot of times, when we go, I've had certainly represented kids in the past that the idea was to segregate that child and keep that child segregated. And it was, it took some doing to get the kid back in the regular classroom with the necessary services and supports. But I've never experienced them arguing that it is least restrictive being in a segregated classroom.
I mean, where I have heard that argument, and I'm personally sympathetic to it, is in the context of culturally deaf children. I've heard people argue that if you're in a classroom where you're the only deaf child, that is isolating for you, and it's actually a more integrated environment for you if there's a critical mass of deaf children in that classroom with you. So I have heard that argument, but I haven't heard it in the context of
it. It's been very difficult for a lot of. It's a huge trend in the area that we're in, and some of us as parents of older children are going in there and even showing, our kids are able to, function more independently and they're able to, facilitate these interactions with peers because they've been included. And, we sit in at the IEP meetings and they still make this argument. And the only way to defend it is really for them to go through due process and to get a lawyer. And the school districts actually have a lawyer on staff and the parents can't afford to challenge it.
I mean, I guess I'm just thinking this out with you. Start with the concept that every child is entitled to a free, appropriate public education. What do we mean by that? We mean that kids with disabilities should be able to access the education system and get out of the education system what other kids access and get out of the education system. So if kids with disabilities are being forced to be in a segregated setting with less supports in that setting, how is that preparing them for life after school compared to being supported in an integrated setting? And if we can make the case, and we have the researchers in this room who could make the case, if we can make the case that for the vast, vast, vast majority of children, the integrated setting is going to prepare them better for life after school, that to me comes back to what is a free, appropriate public education. It's an education that prepares you as best as the school can for life after school.
And there can't be that expectation that children are going to be segregated. The expectation has to be that everybody is going to be educated with everybody else. And then what do we bring in to keep that child in that classroom?
It's very difficult when you have administrators who come into it and have an agenda of what they want to do.
Anything coming in over the transom?
We still haven't. I've encouraged people.
Yeah.
Yeah, what do you see as the future around challenges to Section 14C
Yeah. So section.
Repeat that so
Yeah. So this is a question about what's the future of Section 14C of the Fair Labor Standards Act, which has been on the books for a long time, and says that if a person with a disability in a particular job, their disability affects their productivity in that job, you can pay them less than minimum wage, and you can pay them basically as low as you want, commensurate with their productivity in that job. And there are a number of folks that have said that that is inherently kind of old thinking about disability. It's old thinking about the labor market in general. And it results in a lot of abuses where people are being paid 10 cents an hour. I mean, the case that Senator Harkin was very focused on was from Atalissa, Iowa, the Henry's Turkey Farm case, where you had men who were working alongside men without disabilities, and the men with intellectual disabilities on that farm were getting paid pennies an hour, and the other folks were getting paid above minimum wage. And the men with intellectual disabilities were living in a 100-year-old bunkhouse, and that was like part of the justification. Well, because we're providing housing, which was very substandard, probably human rights violation housing, it's okay to pay them less than minimum wage. So the bottom line is, I think Maryland just passed a law to move away from sub-minimum wage in the state of Maryland. The Ability One program, which is a program that has a 75% of the workforce requirement be people that have very significant disabilities. They have been moving away from sub-minimum wage. So I feel like there's a bipartisan interest and trend right now to move away from sub-minimum wage. Whether that will translate to removing 14C out of the Fair Labor Standards Act or rewriting it in some way, I don't know the answer to that yet. The challenge with that is the same challenge we had under WIOA. When you open up the Fair Labor Standards Act, you generally have a fight about minimum wage, which gets very partisan very quickly. So one way to do the federal change would be to leverage the next time they change the federal minimum wage. And there seems to be a number of Republicans that are ready to raise the federal minimum wage to some degree. But if that consensus emerges, slipping in a change to 14C at the same time is doable. I guess I want to go back to Jeff's comments about the disability community needing to be unified. I want to just broaden out what you said a little bit, because when I was at the American Association of People with Disabilities, our mission was to bring the disability community together writ large so that we have more power politically, socially, and economically. That was why the organization was created. And one way to think about that is, okay, well, who is the disability community? You know, who are we talking about? And a way that I think about that is voters who care about disability issues when they're voting. So it's not just people with disabilities, it's parents and siblings, it's special educators, it's occupational therapists, it's lots of people who have insight into disability issues. And I feel that when we think about how can we all come together, I agree that it needs to start with people with disabilities coming together across all their labels. But I think it's more powerful if that happens alongside family members and professionals, all of whom care about quality of life for people with disabilities. And I don't always know in any given situation who is going to be the leader with the skills that can bring that whole constituency together. Sometimes it's going to be a person with a disability. Sometimes it's going to be a parent. Sometimes it's going to be, an academic or a service provider. But I'm looking for leaders like that that can keep everybody at the table and resolve differences. And I think if we limit ourselves to only disabled people can play that role, sometimes we miss the opportunity for another leader to step up and help us get there faster.
I understand that. I think one of the things personally with that would be is always making sure that we're still avoiding tokenism on that level.
Absolutely.
Is that it's just we're not going to have this group of people because that will show up and be part of the group, even though we don't think that they really participate, that they are just filling a requirement. That is one of my big concerns, and I think within the grassroots self-advocacy piece in Kentucky, one of the things that I hear them keep going back to is it's our voices aren't being heard enough. It is more parents and providers, and that gets to be problematic for them.
Yeah.
Because they're feeling like that they're not being heard all the time.
So for the folks that are here from Kentucky, let's assume what Jeff just described is true. How do we solve that in Kentucky? What's the answer to that problem?
To me, one of the things is, as a parent and an advocate and a former special ed teacher and all those things rolled into one, is trying to formulate a plan so that the folks out there across the state see one organization. I know we have all these wonderful agencies and factions, and it for the average person it's overwhelming. You don't know who you're supposed to go to, you don't know who to listen to, and if there were one solidified approach, as you all have already addressed, that parents can go to and identify it as this is if you have concerns, go to this particular spot, this particular group of people, not obviously P&A, but we hear about all these other agencies out there, and it's overwhelming for a lot of parents that I've talked to.
Well, if you're looking for a model of that kind of a kind of umbrella, honest broker, if you will, there's a great coalition in Tennessee called the Tennessee Disability Coalition that was created by the DD Council. And the DD Council, in their wisdom, did not create a developmental disability coalition. They created a disability coalition. And they hired Carol Westlake to be their executive director, who had worked at the ARC. Carol is one of the kinds of leaders that I was referring to earlier, who knows how to bring people together and keep them together and resolve differences within the family with a lot of, it starts with respect, and really reaching out with respect to lots of different voices. But one of the things I love about the Tennessee Disability Coalition is their priority has been organizing voters. And they have a voter list in Tennessee of over 180,000 voters that they communicate with around every election. Now, you can't build a list that big without having a lot of trust from all the members of your coalition that they want to be part of a bigger effort to do voter registration, enhancing their lists and ultimately turning out voters. But I think if you're looking for a model, that to me is a unique model that's very powerful in Tennessee. Now, have they solved every problem in disability in Tennessee? Absolutely not. But I would kill to have a coalition like that in every state.
Tennessee's not someone we'd like to represent.
I appreciate that.
Just letting you know.
My wife is from Memphis, so I understand that.
Well, we apologize.
No, but I understand that there's some regional, like I heard somebody refer to a Mid-South effort that's run out of Kentucky, and in my world, the capital of the Mid-South is Memphis. But I don't know if that kind of,
Tennessee was a part of the Mid-South Regional Resource Center, so there you go.
there we go. And I don't know if that kind of, if anybody's tried to have that kind of a coalition in Kentucky before.
Well, there was a Kentucky Disability Coalition that was funded by the DD Council years ago, and I don't know, Stephanie's gone, what the current incarnation. Errol, I don't know if they're doing, well, I know they're around, but I don't know what.
No, they're not. Kentucky, Kentucky, I don't think the Kentucky Disability Coalition still exists. I'm thinking you're right, it was funded by the DD Council. I don't know, Claudia, and it's maybe before your time, received any state funds. Now the one thing, my guess is, I don't know if it was its lifespan as the Tennessee one is. It seemed to me that ours was more focused on adult issues.
Yeah.
And I think, but to really get that mass, that, you know, when you get 180,000 people, you need people representing individuals of all ages.
Yeah.
And parents.
Yes, I meant.
Yeah.
And is that cross disability too?
Yeah,
is what they
very cross disability. Yeah.
There is a Kentucky Congress for Spinal Cord Injury that's been started. It's trying to begin to do some advocacy for that particular community. It seems to me like that's something that could be expanded on, even working just, I know the folks that are part of that group are folks that like to collaborate anyway, and so that might be a direction to go.
And I think collaboration is what we're going to have to do in the future. That is, we're not going to have a choice. Different groups, we're going to have to come together and collaborate on issues to get anything changed. That's where we are now.
And at the federal level, one of the things that the Obama administration did without action from Congress is they moved the Administration on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities out of the Administration for Children, Youth, and Families, where it had been for a long time, and into a new Administration for Community Living, where now we're cohabitating with the Administration on Aging and all of the programs authorized under that administration. Independent living has been moved over there. Assistive technology has been moved over there. Brain injury programs have been moved over there. So at the federal level, some of these different programs, all of which want to build out more robust supports in the community for people with a wide range of disabilities across the age spectrum, I do think it creates an opportunity for us to rethink. A lot of us, you know, at the P&A and USED level have talked about the DD network, right? And we've been encouraged for years to collaborate as a DD network. I think in this new Administration of Community Living home, we should be thinking about a disability network that includes the independent living centers, the assistive technology programs, and then ultimately a community living network that includes the aging programs. None of that is easy to do, but I do think that's where we're headed in terms of the encouragement we're going to get from federal funders.
You know, Jeff, going back to what you were saying, and this is something we discussed the last time I was here. I think one of the things that's difficult for people with intellectual disabilities too is to access this information. I mean, we're having this conversation right now, but you know, it's hard for a person who has an intellectual disability to understand this vocabulary that we're using. And so, if there's a way to be respectful, but also present it in an accessible way, so that they can better understand the policy issues that affect them, it's I think that's a hurdle that we really haven't tackled.
Well, you know, we have protection and advocacy. We have a couple advisory bodies, one for, they're based on our grants, but one for people with mental illness, and then, of course, our PAD grants are the people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And that advisory board, I think that, you know, we make sure, like the ABLE Act, what's going on nationally, we do take the time to explain to them what's going on, but it is time. You know, it is a time-taking process. The DD Council does that very well, taking when they're going to vote on anything. But it does change everything because we get so used to speaking in initials and this, lingo that everybody else doesn't get very quickly. But it is about, it's just taking that time and breaking it down. And I think when you talk about bringing groups together, you will have that same conversation repeatedly with people. But I think that's what it's going to take to make people to feel comfortable enough to have conversations with, their parents and teachers and representatives, whoever it is, about what those issues are and how they impact them. But and sometimes it's you just take bits and pieces and start there and just build on it. And I think that's what we forget is, especially when we're talking about IDDD services, is that, people spent years in school and people knowing what their learning styles are. And I don't have an issue with that of saying, so tell me how you learned really well in school. Because if you don't, you're not going to understand how you're going to break that down for a person. And it's just like friends or family. I mean, there are things I can say to my brother in one way, and I can say the exact same thing to my dad, and it's completely lost. And it's just what the perception is and what they hear and, how they hear it. So it is time consuming. But I think with any movement, when we think about, you can go back to the civil rights movement. I mean, we were dealing with people that didn't have the right to vote, the ability to read, and were being asked to take part in something that was much bigger than them. But, once you teach people and get them to understand why this is important, you want people to hang on to something and why they have to move forward. That's what makes that's the important part. It's going to take time. I think this will be very time consuming. Yes, Harold.
Well, let me add before Harold chimes in on this. I guess I would argue the most important thing AUCD has done in the 2.5 years I've been there was Tuesdays with Liz, which is a weekly video series where Liz Weintraub, who keeps it all at a pretty accessible level, interviews policymakers and gets them to break things down where a broad public audience can understand what they're talking about. I feel like we need more of that. Liz has some unique skills, but that is replicable in Georgia. It's replicable in Kentucky. It's replicable in other places. Mississippi has launched their own version. So I do think we need more of that, where self-advocates who are interested in public policy are talking to people that are involved in making public policy and getting them to explain what they're working on and why. The other thing I'll say about Liz, from my perspective, is we will get to a point where when Liz is up walking the halls of Congress, which she does a lot, members will see her, stop what they're doing, and come and talk to her because they know her and they recognize her. That happens in state legislatures a lot. It doesn't happen as much at the federal level, and certainly not with our community. So I really feel like an empowered Liz will be more influential with a lot of legislators, including Republican legislators, than whoever we see as our most powerful lobbyist.
And I agree with you. I think her series has been so influential in empowering people, empowering self-advocates who see the value.
Harold,
Thank you.
you want to
No, I was gonna say the same thing about Liz. But also thinking about, how can we do that at the state level? And probably the best example we have in our institute of making things accessible is the project we do with the Division of Developmental Disabilities and Poor Indicators. And we produce a really fancy data thing that, but then we do an accessible report that truly is accessible in terms of what people's lives and choices and where they live and all that stuff looks like. And actually the policymakers said they didn't like our accessible report better, but it's really meant for everyone. But we could do a much better job of kind of modeling what that project does with DID across HDI.
Well, I think what you bring up, Carol, the point that I kind of chuckled when I talked about is recognizing different learning styles. I think the strength that we bring is recognizing, bringing in principles of universal design for learning, so that when the message goes out, you're reaching a broader audience, regardless of who that's with, but understanding that people are going to take information in different ways and being more agile in how to do that.
And I mean, you can say what you want about Donald Trump, but I think one of the reasons his campaign has had success is his message is very easy to understand.
Is it?
It's
Let's
not,
just say it's on an elementary level.
yeah, it's not easy to agree with, but it's easy to understand.
I also just wanted to ask, we have a lot of student trainees in the room and online, and just if you have thoughts, share at the state and a federal level, how students can get more involved, more active.
You know, I think it is that we have to have those expectations that kids with disabilities are going to be pages at the Capitol. I think that's one of the ways you start. I think that, like Andrew was saying, once you see people that are up there that are people with disabilities, that changes expectations. And come to think of it, maybe not our Capitol, I'm thinking about the accessibility piece, but maybe on other states, that'd be a good idea.
Well, if you have people up there, it'll force changes
Yeah.
in the Capitol.
You know, I think some of the ARC does a lot with children, are starting a young people program, the protection and advocacy. You know, we have advisory boards, and we are always looking for young people. That's something that's very important because we'd like to have the views of people that are in high school or even middle school to tell us what that experience is like for them.
But I think when she talks about trainees, she's not talking about children.
Oh, I'm not thinking.
She's talking about early career professionals.
Oh, thank you. Okay, well then you go, and I'm going to think.
Okay. So I mean, you know, I've had the opportunity to meet a lot of trainees as I travel around the network. It's a very exciting thing for me. I know you guys don't have a LEND, but you might have a LEND moving forward. LEND is an interdisciplinary training program that exists to prepare folks to work with children with disabilities and their families across 19 disciplines, including a family discipline. But we have 3,000 long-term LEND trainees every year, and they're all learning about public policy, advocacy, and leadership. And that's really exciting to me. I see that as kind of growing a movement where professionals and family leaders and self-advocate leaders feel empowered to engage with policymakers. And I feel like, just as somebody who, again, was on the receiving end of a lot of advocacy, Senator Harkin had a weekly breakfast where anybody from Iowa who's in Washington was welcome. And he would have his picture taken, you know, go around the room, everybody's drinking coffee, whatever. Iowans don't like to spend a lot of money, so the food wasn't fancy or anything. But went around the room, picture taken with Senator Harkin. Everybody had an opportunity to give an elevator speech to Senator Harkin about what they were doing in town. A lot of times they were at a national conference or, you know, doing something. But, you know, those folks who were real people who weren't professional lobbyists oftentimes were more interesting for Senator Harkin than a professional lobbyist. So as a trainee, you have experience, some people have experience in clinical settings, some people have experience doing research, you know, whatever their kind of discipline is, where you can break something down for an elected official in a way that's much more interesting and authentic and real than somebody who, you know, like either of us, who's paid to go up there and, you know, carry the water for whatever the message is. So I think trainees can have a huge impact on policy. And my best piece of advice I can give to trainees and anybody else that interacts with policymakers is your ability to influence another person depends on how they feel about themselves when they're with you. So I'll say that again. Your ability to influence another person depends on how they feel about themselves when they're with you. So if you're a trainee talking to a senator or your boyfriend or your girlfriend or whatever, if you want to influence them, you got to start by making them feel good about themselves. One way to do that is to thank them for their time, thank them for their leadership, and a lot of disability advocates, we get so emotional about whatever the issue is that we don't take the time to establish the connection. And if you don't take the time to do that, oftentimes the person you're talking to is shut down, and you're not going to influence them.
I agree totally. I think you have to be very flexible with your time because there are things that certainly will just occur at a spur of the moment, and it's one of those things if you want to be engaged in advocacy like that, you have to be willing to let go and drop what you're doing and go full force in it. I think it is one of those, and I've ran across plenty of people in my time. I think you either have the heart for it and you believe for it and it's the right thing you want to do. I think that just it shows, and I think that's something that our legislators and their staff often do remember is the fact that you were passionate about a subject, you were knowledgeable about the subject, and to be able to tell them why it's important. And patience. I think it's things that we want to see accomplished that take 5, 6, 7 years. And I think there are things that we've talked about today that for some of us we won't see in our lifetimes. It just will not happen because it's that evolution. It's a cultural evolution that has to occur.
And I think on the patience front, I had a mentor at the beginning of my career who was a community organizer with ADAPT in Massachusetts. And ADAPT is an organization that does a lot of civil disobedience, gets arrested, to try to move the ball forward on issues. They started out trying to make buses accessible, and after they succeeded on that, they moved on to trying to get rid of the institutional bias in the Medicaid program, which they're still working on. But this organizer said to me early in my career, when we're working on a piece of legislation, whether we win or lose, if at the end of the process we're stronger and we have a bigger coalition and a bigger set of allies than we had at the beginning of the process, we have won. The legislation is an excuse to get better organized, not the other way around. And I think sometimes in the disability world, we get so focused on getting the bill passed, we don't take the time to think about, okay, what relationships am I damaging to get this bill passed? And if you damage enough relationships to get the bill passed, getting the bill passed may be winning the battle, but not positioning yourselves to win the war, over the long term. And I think that's just another form of the patience that you're talking about.
This is Carolyn Wheeler at Coldstream. I just wanted to make a couple of comments. One is that the 874K Coalition, I think, has been quite effective here in Kentucky. I mean, the most recent rally, February 2nd, Wolf and I know we're both there. I mean, there were hundreds of people with disabilities who went and spoke to their legislators, and also there was a rally in Rotunda. The governor was there. A lot of people told their stories. I'm not sure where that's going to go because the linchpin for that, Sheila Schuster, is retiring. So I think that's something needs to be considered from the DB network about maintaining that presence, because it's had a strong presence in Kentucky now for a number of years. Secondly, I just wanted to comment that the disability policy seminar that I recently did in Washington was phenomenal, and kudos to the 6 organizing organizations. There were a number of people with intellectual development disabilities who had leadership roles, who spoke, and I think we should consider that the DD network should consider sponsoring something like that here in Kentucky. Sure. We should have a disability policy seminar here in Kentucky that would include family members, people who work in the field, and people with disabilities. So we'll plant that seed. But I think that could be something the network could consider sponsoring along similar to what happened in Washington. It was very powerful, very effective. And I don't know how many Hill visits occurred, but I will tell you that I met our friends, the McCormicks, Megan McCormick and her parents in the airport that Tuesday night leaving, and and actually Lynn Breaker and her son Anderson Cooper, there had been an event by the National Down Syndrome Society teaching parents and family members how to lobby. And actually, our Megan McCormick, whom many of us know and value very deeply, had actually spoken with Senator Mitch McConnell. Now, I'm not sure what Megan told me, but I would just ask that he will remember Megan.
And
so
he spoke for Senator McConnell gave that Down syndrome group, that was the buddy walk on Washington, which I learned is actually not a walk. But anyway, Senator McConnell gave them 40 minutes.
That's amazing. I get a staffer for 3. But you know, Carolyn.
Stephanie and folks did visit. I say Stephanie and folks did visits the next day, so I don't know how that all went. But anyway, go ahead, Jeff.
Well, but you know, I think
we're out of time.
Yeah, I know. 874. I mean, it's once a year though, and while there are groups and people cross disabilities that are speaking, it's a once a year function. And I agree, we have to figure out how we're going to carry that the other 364 days to have a true systemic impact, other than saying, you know, we are the 874K coalition. You know, this is what we stand for, but we don't tell you anything we stand for any other day of the year. And that's very problematic.
If you're looking for a model to do a disability policy gathering at the state level, one interesting model that's worth looking at, and I don't know if it's as robust now as it once was, is the Kansas Disability Caucus. They have a caucus meeting of very broad, and they always have a lot of self-advocates with intellectual disabilities at this. They do it every 2 years, and they use it to develop a legislative agenda to then take to the legislature, which is meeting every 2 years. And sometimes it helps to have a convening where there's a reason to do it then. So it's just worth thinking about what's the natural rhythm at the state level, and is there a way you could take advantage of that rhythm to bring people together to do some agenda setting?
And there is a natural rhythm, because even though our legislature now meets every year, but every other year is a budget year. So that convening a few months before that, every other year would make a lot of sense.
I would like to thank Jeff and Andy for this conversation with us this afternoon. Thank you. Thank you for your time and attention this afternoon. We will be sending out announcements for future seminars, so look for those. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Walt.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
The short discussion